What if I told you that we can still limit the worst effects of climate change? In other words, that we can stick to the 1.5 degree limit set by the Paris Agreement 10 years ago by all nations in the world? Well, it might be very, very unlikely, but theoretically and physically speaking, we're still in the pathway of limiting temperature or worldwide temperature to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And it's almost impossible, let's be honest, but the pathway is still possible. And more than that, the fact that that pathway is still possible also means that we've potentially reduced the risk of catastrophic, irreversible climate change. Let me tell you why. First of all, what does this 1.5 Paris Agreement really mean? Well, basically, 10 years ago, all the nations in the world, 193 nations, ratified the Paris Agreement, which basically means that they want to limit the temperatures, global temperatures, to 2 degrees, or if possible, to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Later in 2018, the IPCC, the Climate Justice Department, or I would say Intergovernmental Organization of the UN, established the goal to limit it to 1.5 degrees, as otherwise we might surpass certain thresholds that might be irreversible, such as sea level rise, acidification of the oceans, and so on and so forth. So basically, this means that that's a limit, a 1.5 limit of global temperature for humanity, not to surpass that threshold, because otherwise things might get very messy at the very least. And really the pathway of humanity is to not to reach that threshold, as otherwise there are some feedback loops that are triggered, and therefore more forests might get burned, which might get turned into a savanna and then to a desert. And also with the Arctic ice, as temperatures get higher, that includes in the Arctic and obviously other many places, Antarctica and Greenland and so on, and the albedo effect of ice, such as wearing not a white shirt, but in this case white surfaces, do contrast quite a lot and send back the temperature that the sun sends us, and so on, right? So this is a very simple explanation of feedback loops. You can check out the videos of the channel if you're interested about them. But basically that means that if you don't surpass certain thresholds, I mean, the climate change impacts would still be dire in some places and sometimes completely catastrophic, but at the very least it might not pose a civilizational threat to the entire species of the human species. So humanity might not go astray because of climate change. And we still have the possibility to be in the pathway of limiting temperature, global temperature to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So that's good news. Yes, let's celebrate it. The bad news really is that most likely, or 99%, we won't get there. But still, we can get to 2 degrees, 2.1, 2.2, which hopefully it's not the case, but it's better than 3 or 4 degrees. Because in a scenario of 3 or 4 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, I mean, I wouldn't like to live there, to be honest. Hopefully that's never the case, but that really means it's not that it's only 3 degrees hotter in the summer. It's that it's exponentially hotter, and the climate impacts are catastrophic really in most regions in the world at some point. So this is a pathway that hopefully we won't get there. And also we have some good news really, because if we take back last decade, we're projected to hit 4 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. We're now in the track of 2.7, and this is partly because of the accelerated deployment of solar energy and wind energy, which basically means that renewable energy now today is cheaper to produce than most fossil fuels. And this is great news, and this is being led, for example, by China and India, but also among many other nation states. But you could say, oh, wait, but China is the highest and fastest greenhouse gas effect contributor to the atmosphere. You're partially right. Today it is the highest contributor, yes. But you need to take into account cumulative emissions, historical emissions, as CO2, methane, and so on, get stuck in the atmosphere for decades, and some of them for a century and a half or so. So really what matters is cumulative emissions, in China and India and Latam and Africa per se have not contributed as much as the United States or Europe. So really the highest responsibility is from those developed countries that contributed the most, and the reason why they are developed now is because they contributed the most to greenhouse gas or CO2 related emissions. So it's not to blame China or India, but the opposite is to congratulate them to the deployment of electric vehicles, to renewable energy and so on, especially China. And even though they're still contributing quite a lot to CO2 related global emissions, they are really the country that might be leading the way. We'll see, of course, because the National Determined Contribution, which basically means, it's called NDC, which is the country stating that that's the compromise they have with a plan, a specific plan with KPIs, indicators, and so on in a short to medium to long run. That basically means that my country is ready to fully decarbonize by X year in this way. So China is doing that, and it's accelerating the pace and the deployment, and even in public stances that are not as relevant in practical terms, but in theoretical terms, or at least in a public policy perspective, it is extremely relevant because they set in the tone. And really, it's a stark contrast with the United States. And the States is calling still, and it's pretty unbelievable because most of the scientific community is clearly stating that climate change is not only real, but it poses a significant threat and one of the drivers of annihilating humanity in the long run. Of course, not in the short to medium run, but it can be one of those threats, right? With AI and obviously nuclear bombs and so on. So, and the international community, even China or many other countries, are completely devoted to mitigating the issue. And the United States, Donald Trump in this case, is calling climate change a hoax and so on, which not only doesn't make sense, but also economic sense, because renewable energy, again, is the cheapest energy producing material, in this case a vector, of the entire energy mix. So it doesn't make sense at all. And we see China taking a leadership role. Of course, the European Union is taking a leadership role as well, but the impact that the European Union can have is minimal in comparison to China because of the potential impact in the economy, but also because China is currently in the second seat in world leader in global affairs. And also the implication that has is much higher than the European Union, and obviously the European Union is lagging behind in many of their goals, including the electrification of the electric vehicles deployment in the region. So we applaud the efforts of China in this regard. Of course, there are many other criticisms in how their leaders govern the country, but at the very least in terms of climate change mitigation and potential adaptation, and we need to congratulate, and it's a reason to have optimism because one of the biggest players in the world is completely devoted to the challenge. Of course, most likely the reasons behind is not only of a matter of mitigating a global issue, but rather becoming the leader of the sector of tomorrow, which is the electrification and new materials including, who knows, quantum computers, or obviously having electric vehicles that are completely electrified and are completely autonomous, which is better for the healthcare of the country, but also prices are much competitive. Also having energy sovereignty, having extremely robust energy grid, very cheap electricity bills for the population, and so on. Of course, these are legitimate reasons also to make the transition as fast as possible. And these are the reasons also that the Chinese government are taking for granted. But still, congratulate the country and also many other countries of making this global transition as fast as possible, because it is required, as otherwise we might be crossing tipping points that are irreversible. And some regions are already being catastrophically hit by the current events of climate change. Imagine in a world that is twice, 3 times, 10 times as worse as today when it comes to the potential negative impacts of climate weather events. So we hope that never happens. Obviously, we still have the pathway of the best case scenario. Most likely we will be in a kind of a middle or partially catastrophe pathway, but who knows if we can still stick to the 1.5 degree pathway, because actors such as China, among many others, are leading the way, and we hope that other actors do that as well, including, I'm very sorry, the United States. So with that, I hope you found some optimism in today's video. Consider subscribing to the channel, and as always, embrace your curiosity, enjoy life, and be the change you want to see in the world. See you in the next Optimistic and Adventure.